Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you wherever you are in the world. Welcome to my little yoga channel. My name is Meg and I am a fully qualified yoga teacher, masseuse and beautician, and this is my little corner of YouTube where I talk about yoga, some tips and tricks, things that you can follow along from home, and a little bit of health and wellness as well. Basically everything that I do in my job every single day. Today I want to talk really briefly, just touch on the different kinds of yoga asana classes that you can go to, the difference between them and what each one of them normally entails. The reason I'm doing this is because I've had quite a few people ask me where do I start with my yoga journey, or I want to go to a class and I don't know where I would fit in. And I've also had a lot of people asking me what I teach in my classes. So let's just touch really briefly on, I'm going to go through the 5 kind of main ones, certainly from where I'm from. I live in England, and these are kind of the 5 main yoga class names that come up that seem to be popular around here. I will just touch on and say that every teacher has their own style, every teacher has their own way of teaching. So just because you might hear a description for one of these types of classes and you go and it doesn't fit for you, it doesn't necessarily mean that the class is wrong for you. Every single teacher is different. So that's something that is always worth bearing in mind when you start going to a class as well. And also that there are literally thousands of different kinds of yoga classes. When yoga first became popular in the West, I think a lot of people sort of took it on and started creating like their own kinds of yoga asana classes to try and make them a little bit more interesting, or to try and fit with their niche and their target market. A lot of gyms have taken it on, and I think a lot of people as well might label their classes as yoga, but it is not necessarily yoga. So that's another thing to bear in mind as well. I really think it's important, if you're interested in learning proper yoga, to get to know your teacher, listen to them, see if they can teach you a little bit about the history, the insight and the theory behind yoga. If that's what you're looking to go into, you want to make sure you have a teacher who's really comprehensive in the theory behind yoga before diving into their class, because if they don't have the sort of theory behind it, and if they don't know the 8 limbs of yoga, which is one of my videos that I cover, then they can't bring those other elements of yoga into your asana class, which means it just becomes like an exercise class, which is fine if that's what you're looking for. But if you're looking to properly learn how to do yoga, definitely make sure that your teacher knows what they're talking about when it comes to the theory of yoga. Some things you can do so that you know some facts as well before you go in is follow some podcasts. One of my favorite is Let's Talk Yoga by Hatha. She is on Spotify, and I think she might be on Apple Podcasts as well, but don't hold me to that. I'll double check and pop that in the link, or maybe I'll write it here. I'll double check after this video. I'm going to start with Hatha Yoga. So Hatha Yoga, if you see that advertised, is kind of a general term in Western yoga. Hatha yoga is a general term for yoga. So this could mean that when you come into your class, you're going to be doing a few poses. Perhaps you're going to be looking at breathing techniques, a little bit of meditation as well. So if you're brand new to yoga, seeing a Hatha yoga class is probably going to be quite good for you, especially if you want to have a bit of an oversight into all the different aspects of yoga. The next one that I'm going to go into is yin yoga. Yin yoga is brilliant, especially if you're looking at improving your flexibility, and again if you're fairly new to yoga. So yin yoga is a lot more asana based. Hatha yoga tends to touch on a little bit more of the pranayama, so breathing techniques, tends to go in a little bit of meditation as well. When you go into a yin yoga class, that then refers to, yin asana refers to holding a pose for 1 to 5 minutes. This is what I originally trained in, and it is brilliant to help with flexibility especially. It's also really good for strength. It can be a really challenging class. So yin yoga isn't always a really easy class. So again, talk to your teacher, get a feel for it, maybe try it, but you might be better off starting with a easier yin yoga class and then going into a harder yin yoga class. And the difference here is that if you're holding a stretch for 5 minutes, let's say you're holding staff pose. Let's say you're coming into staff pose for 5 minutes. That is quite an intense stretch, but it can be done. And if you hold it at sort of 50 to 70%, what you actually start doing is stretching the fascia that sits around the muscle. So if you stretch really quickly at 100%, all you're doing, imagine you've got an elastic band, you're just going, that's it. You're just stretching and then bringing it back. And that can lead to pulled muscles, it can lead to overstretching. So it's not the best way to improve flexibility. If you're holding a stretch, holding it and holding it and holding it for sort of 2 to 5-ish minutes, which is how long they tend to hold them during a yin yoga class, you will actually gain a lot more flexibility. Where this starts to get a little bit harder is, for example, if you're coming into a warrior 1 pose, if you have to hold that for 5 minutes, that is going to be killer. Same with things like chaturangas, any sort of strength base. If you're holding that for a long time, that is a lot for your body to take. And this is why yin yoga is fantastic if you want a slower moving class and something that maybe you can start off as a beginner and work your way up. The third type of class I'm going to go into, and I think this is up there with yin yoga as probably the most popular type of class, is a vinyasa class. And vinyasa is quite a broad term. What I tend to interpret vinyasa as vinyasa is like a flow class. So if you come into like a yin class, for example, you might do 1 pose, let's say staff pose. You might then move into bound angle. You might then move into your next pose, but you stop and then you come into the pose. You stop and then you come into the next pose. When you come into more of a vinyasa class, you're starting to bring that strength and that flexibility in together into almost like a back-to-back flow. So you move from one position to the other with like a smooth transition. Vinyasa classes are fantastic if you want to work on a bit of strength, if you're somebody who needs to have your brain challenged a little bit more. Maybe you're someone who has like a dance background like I do, so that element of the vinyasa flow, I think it has almost like a creative aspect to it, so it's really kind of good for that creative side of you. I love teaching vinyasa. I teach yin and I teach vinyasa flow. I really do enjoy creating, teaching, and just seeing the progression in a vinyasa class. Often I think vinyasa tends to be, if it's normally a flow class, I think it tends to be slightly more advanced than the yin. Because you're transitioning from one pose to the next, you do end up gaining quite a bit of muscle strength there. So you have that added benefit even in a basic vinyasa class, that you're starting to bring that element of strength into it a little bit more. The fourth kind of yoga class, which I think I personally have actually never done and have never attended, is an ashtanga yoga class. And I think the reason I've personally never attended an ashtanga yoga class is because ashtanga and vinyasa are very similar. They are both flow-based classes. Vinyasa has that creative element where you have different flows, and I, for example, will teach the same flow for an entire month that I do all of my classes in, and then the next month I come in and do a new flow for that month. Ashtanga, you are doing the same flow all the time. I think it's 6 set movements that you do, but the difference is that you'll start off potentially doing the 6 movements at a basic level, and then as you get more and more advanced, you can start bringing in things like jumps, a few arm balances. I can't say too much about ashtanga. This is just from what I've seen and heard and learned and picked up over time. I personally, like I said, have never done an ashtanga class, so I can't give too much information on that, but that is more of what an ashtanga class is, the same flow every single week. The last one I'm going to go into, actually I'm going to bring in a 6th one which seems to have gained popularity, but the last one for now that I'm going to go into is yoga nidra. And this is working a little bit more on the meditation side, maybe even going into the pranayama a little bit more. So the asana, which is the physical practice of yoga, isn't really done in a yoga nidra class. You tend to go in, you'll have bolsters, cushions, blankets. It's a very quiet, it's a dark space usually, very relaxed, and you come into your space and you will basically come into either a guided meditation or guided to begin with, and then it will become just pure meditation. You might come into your pranayama, so they might start with a few breathing techniques. Normally at the end of most yoga classes across the board, whether it's Hatha, Yin, Vinyasa, Ashtanga, you will probably do some element of a meditation. Whether, like in my classes, I will always end in what's called a shavasana, so your final resting pose. And that is where I will get my class to lie and just come into like a meditation just at the end of the class to completely shut off the mind and start working on those elements of yoga. So I just touch on it in my classes. A yoga nidra class, that is all you will do, is you will come in, maybe you'll do 1 or 2 asana movements or 1 or 2 poses, but you will basically work on your meditation. And the very last one that I'm going to add in, which seems to have gained loads of popularity lately, is hot yoga. So basically you're coming into a studio where the air temperature has been pumped up to like 35-40 degrees, really warm, and you will do, normally I think it's a vinyasa from what I've heard, and from what I've done, tends to be a vinyasa flow class, and you'll do your flow, you'll do your yoga asana in a really hot room. Hot yoga is really good if you're somebody who maybe needs to work a little bit more on their flexibility. Because you're coming in with like a warm body, you're going to be able to stretch just that little bit further. One thing I will say about hot yoga is that where yoga originates, so in India, a lot of people will say, oh, well, in India it's really hot all of the time, so it's kind of makes you feel like that's where you're doing it, you're kind of coming back to your roots of yoga. This isn't really the case, because in India they tend to practice their yoga asana either really late at night or first thing in the morning, like sunrise and sunset, when everything starts to cool down, and that is because it gets so hot. So although some people will go to a hot yoga class specifically for that reason, that isn't always correct. So worth knowing. I think hot yoga can be very beneficial, but I also do think from an environmental aspect, I mean, I live in England and it is blimmin' chilly here right now. Having your heating up at 40 degrees is not probably the best thing for the environment, which I think people should think a little bit about as well. If you're going into the correct class for you, and if you're looking for something that's going to heat the body, you're better off finding a slightly more challenging class or a teacher that's able to challenge you enough to get that heat into your body, rather than potentially going to a hot yoga class. But again, it's worth trying. If it works for you and you enjoy hot yoga, absolutely go for it, do it. So that is a quick little insight onto some of the classes, or the most popular classes certainly around here, and what they all do, what you should expect. It doesn't matter what class you go into, just make sure that you are comfortable, you're happy, you like the teacher, and please don't be disheartened if you go to a class and maybe the teacher doesn't work for you or the style of yoga isn't right for you. It doesn't mean that yoga is wrong for you, it just means you might need to go into a different level or a different type of yoga asana class. So if you're thinking about starting classes, or maybe you've started one and you're not sure if it's right for you, please don't be disheartened. Just try a different one. You're in such a great point in your yoga journey because you basically get to experiment and try everything, and everything's new, and you're going to meet new people, have new experiences. It's such a nice part of your journey to be in, because you're kind of exploring where you're going to fit in and where you want to start off and what you enjoy and where you find your passion. So don't be disheartened by anything and enjoy your yoga practice. If you guys have got any questions at all, please drop me a comment. I'm always happy to answer any questions, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks. Bye. Oh.